So I got a bunch of different Israel updates here that I want to get to with you guys, so we're just going to go ahead and hop into it, starting with this. Here from Axios. Senate soundly rejects push to scrutinize Israel aid. So this was a bill that was brought forward by one Bernard Sanders, and it wasn't to hold Israeli politicians accountable for some of their genocidal rhetoric, or to, criticize Bibi for a genocidal campaign in Gaza, or to even end weapons shipments to Israel, or to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. It was only to get a report done by the State Department on whether or not Israel is violating human rights law. Okay? That's it. That's what this bill was. And overwhelmingly, it was voted against. The Senate voted 72 to 11 to table the resolution, effectively killing it. Now, a little bit of credit to the senators who did vote, for this. Sanders, Senators Martin Heinrich, Jeff Merkley, Chris Van Hollen, Ed Markey, LaFonza Butler, Ben Ray Lujan, Mazi Hirono, Peter Welch, Elizabeth Warren. They voted against blocking this resolution. Rand Paul was the lone Republican, not unexpected there, who voted against tabling it. Okay? 72 voted to kill this resolution, just to look into whether or not they're violating human rights law. They say Sanders used a rarely invoked provision of the Foreign Assistance Act, allowing him to force a vote on a resolution directing the State Department to send a report to Congress on Israel's human rights record. I mean, we're sending this country millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in aid, including weapons and the bombs that are dropping on innocent men, women, and children in Gaza. Coming out, insisting, the Biden administration, most U.S. politicians, of course they're following international law. The South Africa ICJ genocide case is completely meritless. It's ridiculous, right? And we're giving them all of these weapons, and you don't even want a report on their human rights record? How do you justify that? How do you make sense of that, other than it's an obvious, ploy to not get an answer to the question, because they know the answer to the question, that Israel, of course, is not following international law. Of course, they are violating human rights law. And if they are doing that, which they are, then it's also illegal under U.S. law for us to be giving them weapons. And I think that's exactly what they all understand. And so they don't want to open up that can of worms, essentially, right? Couldn't dare to hold our closest ally in the world, effectively the 51st state. Couldn't dare to hold them accountable, or even look into whether or not we should maybe hypothetically hold them accountable. Just absolute embarrassment. We have this update here from Euromed Monitor. On 100th day of Gaza genocide, 100,000 Palestinians killed, missing, or wounded. And again, they point out down here, 92% are estimated to be civilians. So Israel can bomb hospitals and churches and schools and UN shelters and refugee camps and everything under the sun. They can assassinate and target journalists and their family members. They can kill, almost at this point, 30,000 innocent men, women, and children. 92% of their targets being civilians. They can do all of this. They can starve the population of Gaza. They can displace almost the entirety of the population in Gaza, right? They can do all of that. And not only will the U.S. not call them out for it, not only will we even accurately define what is happening right now with our support, with our tax dollars, but we won't even do official reports to look into what's happening. We also had this here from CNBC. Biden designates the Houthis as a terrorist group as the U.S. ramps up Red Sea counterstrikes. So I talked about this a couple of days ago in terms of how ineffective these strikes on the Houthis have been and will be, and how delusional this foreign policy is from Biden. I mean, Houthis continue attacks in the Red Sea even after a series of U.S. military strikes. Yeah, of course they're going to continue. What is the goal of the strikes? What is the goal of designating them as a terrorist group? And as they point out down here, the State Department revoked the Houthis' foreign terrorist organization label in 2021 in response to humanitarian groups that claimed it was accelerating a famine in Yemen, which it was. It was one of the worst humanitarian crises on the face of the planet in modern history, okay, in Yemen during the Saudi, offensive inside of Yemen against the Houthis that was backed by the United States, right? So the Saudis fought the Houthis to try to displace them from power. They are the de facto government of Yemen, right? They did that for years, trying to defeat the Houthis, remove them from power, remove their offensive capability, backed up by the United States. And somehow, even after all of that, almost immediately, in a very short time period after there was some sort of a ceasefire agreement that was worked out between the Saudis and the Houthis, right? Now Biden is like, no, I'm revoking that, even though under my administration, we took that off. We took them off of this list. Now I'm putting them back on the list. We're going to continue striking them. And where is this? What is the goal of this? I mean, seriously, what is the goal of this? I guess they would say the goal is to deter them. Well, it's not deterring them. If the goal is to open up the Red Sea so that ships can pass without being blockaded, if that's the goal, then it's certainly not working. Because if anything, the attacks are ramping up. If the goal is to displace them from power, that's not going to work. You already tried that for years, and it produced a horrific humanitarian crisis. So what the fuck is the goal of any of this? I mean, it is just utterly delusional. If anything, it's making the situation worse. Here we have another thing. Shell suspends Red Sea shipments amid fears of more Houthi attacks. Yeah, going and starting a hot war, expanding the conflict in this region, yeah, that's going to calm down all of these companies so that they feel safe going into the Red Sea. The only thing that will stop the attacks on the shipping vessels by the Houthis is ending your support for Israel's offensive into Gaza, getting a ceasefire. They've openly said this, right? That's the only reason this is happening. They're not just like random pirates going around and trying to loot ships for the fuck of it. They're doing this for a very specific and explicitly stated reason, and that is to put pressure on Israel's economy, on the global economy, to end the genocide, right? And you can even make an argument along, international law bounds, because Yemen, as a signatory of, the ICJ, they have a responsibility, as does every country, especially allies of Israel, to help to end the genocide in Gaza. You have an obligation under international law to do that. And so effectively what they're doing here is doing a blockade. And now the United States, the country that has had an effective blockade and embargo on Cuba for like 60 some odd years now, now we have a principled stance against using blockades as a strategy to apply economic pressure on a country that you politically disagree with, right? Now suddenly we're principally opposed to that, right? We would never hijack ships. We would never seize Iranian oil tankers or Venezuelan oil tankers, right? That's never happened in American history. I mean, just utter hypocrisy and straight up ridiculous foreign policy that's going to get absolutely nowhere other than expanding the war further. This was an interesting map that was put out by the New York Times, just to give us a little bit of a glimpse in terms of all of the recent, hectic escalations that have been going on recently. Continuing, Israel and Hezbollah have been fighting along Israel's border with Lebanon, and I'll get to more on that here in a second. U.S. officials said Israel was responsible for assassinating a top Hamas leader in Beirut, so doing strikes inside of Lebanon, and I think, honestly, Israel would love to have this war expand to Lebanon and, go after Hezbollah and probably Iran as well, and just get all of this done from their perspective in one fell swoop. You also had Israel killed a Hamas official in Syria. Iran-linked militias have attacked U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. The Islamic State killed dozens in a bombing attack inside of Iran. The U.S. and allied forces hit Houthi-linked targets in Yemen, and the Houthis, of course, are continuing those Red Sea attacks. So it's just spiraling, man. There's no end in sight to any of this, right? And to back up that point there, Netanyahu, Gaza war until 2025. He has reportedly told the heads of the communities along the Gaza border in Israel that according to recent assessments of the ongoing Hamas war, the conflict could continue into 2025, an entire year from now. That's what he talked. Joe Biden was pretending like, I'm putting all of this pressure on him behind the scenes to wrap it up by January, right? We're going to wrap it up by the end of the month. What happened to that? Is the behind the scenes, don't do that approach not working? It's almost like you have to actually use the levers of power that you have at your disposal to force Netanyahu to stop. He has no incentive to stop what they're doing in Gaza whatsoever, unless there is massive pressure from the international community, and really just from Joe Biden, just from the United States. He has more power to end this than anybody else on the face of the planet. We also had this, again, IDF Chief of Staff, the likelihood of war in the north with Hezbollah is higher than before. So it's, again, just spiraling into a worse and worse situation. This was a good article that I'll link down below for you guys. Analysis, why Israel's political and military leaders want a perpetual war. Many of the country's decision makers appear enamored of a situation in which Israel-Hamas war continues with no end in sight. This is why it could benefit them, and it goes on to detail how Netanyahu and Gantz and Yoav Gallant and a lot of these other guys stand to benefit, because it will help to keep themselves in these positions in power, especially with somebody like Netanyahu, with all of the, corruption cases against him and other scandals. And the only thing that is keeping him in power right now is this war, right? You can even look internally inside of Israel with their polling data. He has a 6% approval rating, favorability rating inside of Israel. A vast majority want somebody else to run the country, but there's an important caveat to that. They don't want that change of leadership, from what I've seen, until after the war is over. Oh, so what's the solution? Let's keep the war going forever. Keep myself in power, keep myself protected forever from any sort of accountability, both, in terms of international law and also domestically in his political career, right? So they have an incentive to expand this war, continue the war, drag the U.S. into the war, just an absolute clusterfuck. We also had here from Kenneth Roth, an update in terms of some of the starvation. Because of Israel's obstructions, people in Gaza risk dying of hunger just miles from trucks filled with food, and this backs up what even some U.S. senators who went and visited on the border where some of the trucks are coming in, they went and they saw what the IDF was doing. They're basically, a truck pulls up, they empty out the entire truck. If there's a single thing in there that they arbitrarily say, oh, that looks a little bit shady. Hey, you got a tent in there? Well, maybe the tent pole can be used as an explosive device or something like that. Turn the whole truck around. Right? Do it again. And so they're intentionally preventing aid from getting into Gaza, right? While also pretending in front of the International Court of Justice, oh, we're doing everything we can to deliver ample amounts of humanitarian aid. And also keep in mind, right, as he points out here, this is not a natural consequence of war, but a deliberate strategy, despite denials by Israel's lawyers at the ICJ case. And I just read you guys a couple of days ago the statement from the COGAT representative, the organization COGAT that is responsible for the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And she straight up said it's in their DNA. It is in Arab DNA to hoard food. She said there is no hunger in Gaza. As the United Nations is saying virtually everybody in Gaza is going hungry right now. That hundreds of thousands, if not close to 1 million or more people right now, are at risk of starvation and disease, dying from starvation and disease over the next couple of months, right? And their representatives are coming out here and saying things like it's in Arab DNA to hoard food. We're putting ample aid into Gaza. It's just a straight up lie. I mean, there's no other way to put it. We also had here from Ryan Grimm, continued assaults on the hospital networks in Gaza. A vast majority of the hospitals in Gaza are no longer functioning due to Israel's attacks. And now we have another one. The IDF is closing in on the Al Nasser hospital, one of the only remaining functional, semi-functional hospitals inside of Gaza, since furiously protesting responsibility for one strike on one hospital, the Al Ali hospital. Early in the assault, the IDF has systematically assaulted the healthcare infrastructure of the entire Gaza Strip. Al Nasser is packed. Right? So there are thousands of people here who are being treated, on the one hand, who are trying to take shelter there because nowhere is safe inside of Gaza, and now this is also no longer safe. So, I mean, do they have to destroy every single hospital in Gaza before some Democrats, Republicans, Biden wake up? What is it going to take? Every single hospital, every single mosque, every single church, every single child dying? How many people have to die of starvation and disease, right? Before there's some sort of a shift change here. And I don't buy at all that Joe Biden, he's frustrated with Netanyahu behind the scenes. Then fucking do something about it. Don't stop having your people leak to the press. Oh, I'm frustrated with Netanyahu, right? I mean, that's nothing. You have the power to end this. We've talked about it. It's very clear. We've seen other presidents do it before. The United States has immense power and influence over the direction of this. Biden has gone with the strategy of, well, if I'm just really nice to them in public and I back up every single thing that they do and say and give them protection and give them infinite weapons, then maybe behind the scenes I'll have power. It's not how it works. That's not how it works. They've been completely ignoring Joe Biden. If you even buy the idea that he has been telling them to wrap it up or to ease up on the slaughter of civilians, which I really don't. And so I'm going to finish off with this here, right? This was Representative MEP Claire Dolly, I believe is how you say that name. And she's Irish, which means most of the time has some pretty base politics for the most part. And I've seen her in a bunch of different other clips and speeches before, so I know who she is. But she was giving a speech, and she calls out Joe Biden and basically says, listen, man, you don't even get to claim your Irish heritage anymore. You're kicked out of the Irish, community. You have no credibility here. So let's listen to this.
Despite the catastrophic death toll it has inflicted, Israel is losing on the ground and in the court of public opinion. There's no way that this ends that doesn't leave Israel a pariah state with occupation and apartheid on borrowed time, and they know it. So they're doing everything they can. Desperate acts of aggression to provoke a wider conflict with Lebanon, with Iran, with anybody, to draw in the US, to save them from the consequences of their own actions. And as Yemen shows, Butcher Biden is reporting for duty. With Europe's proud genocide by his side, they are the ones who have enabled the continuation of Israeli terror. Without them, it would already be over. So take note, Butcher Biden. The ancestors of the Ireland that you claim to be from disown you. Keep our country out of your mouth. And as for von der Leyen and genocidal Germany, with your words and deeds supporting Israel in the ICJ, not in our name. The people of Europe stand with Palestine and with South Africa.
Wow. That was one of the, best speeches I've seen in a while. And good for her for, obviously using that against Biden. He's very proud and often makes jokes and brings up his Irish heritage. So I hope that he sees it, and I hope that it's a kick in the balls for him, honestly. She's right in the sense that I do find it hard to believe that Israel can finish this, or when it does at some point inevitably end, that they can come out the other side of this and not be considered a pariah state by a majority of the world. I mean, sure, the United States can continue in the dark, and many Western European countries as well, but a lot of the world sees Israel for what it is, and this is not something that is going to be easy to recover from. The Biden administration thinks that it will be, both in terms of the international community, which is obviously delusional, but also here domestically. The Biden administration thinks that by the 2024 election, that people will have just forgotten about all this. That it'll just fade away and we'll move on with our days, and it won't impact him, with Arab American communities or with young people or with anybody with a moral conscience. They are utterly blinded, and they don't understand the long-standing ramifications that this is going to have, right? And so that's what it's going to take. I mean, in the short term, obviously you need pressure for a ceasefire. The protests, I think, have had an influence. The boycotts of many companies, I think, have had an influence. Endless calls to politicians and confronting them in public spaces and all of that good stuff. Blocking of weapon shipments at some of the ports around the United States and around the world, for that matter. I think those have been impactful. And I don't see the protests slowing down. And so, keep that up. If you can go to one, then go to one, stay safe. But, we need to do everything that we can. I mean, step one is ceasefire, right? Step two is hold everybody involved accountable for their crimes, right? Step three is going to be some sort of massive rebuilding effort to try to remedy the situation in Gaza, where everything has been destroyed and flattened to the ground. You're going to need an entirely new framework for, if the U.S. ever wants to have any influence in the entire region again, you're going to need to completely rethink that. And then obviously I hope the ICJ case succeeds as well in the short term and the long term. And, as she was pointing out there, in the long term, making Israel a pariah state, economically, politically, diplomatically, that's what it's going to take. That's what it took for South Africa. That's what ended up working. That's why I'm a supporter of the BDS strategy that was largely used and influential against South Africa, being used against Israel as well. But, I mean, we really do need to use every single tool that we possibly can get our hands on in order to end this, or the bloodshed is just going to continue.